Welcome to the Philip K Dicksquisition. This week, the short story, Stability. It's our first episode of the Philip K Dicksquisition, the exquisitely named podcast in which we will explore the life and works of one Philip K. Dick. The idea here, just to set the tone, is that we have three perspectives in the room. I am intimately familiar, especially with this story, Stability, having been thinking about doing this sort of a podcast for quite some time. And Stability has long been my way in to this sort of conversation for reasons that will perhaps become clear as we go on to talk about it. So I've thought a lot about this story over the course of a relatively long time. Then we have a little bit further down the engagement totem pole, we have Abe, who I invited to simply read the story, and then also he will have read my response essay to it as well, so that we can have an enjoyable conversation about the story. And then it feels like I'm judging levels of engagement here, but at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of engagement would be Lori, who, even if I asked nicely, would likely not read the story.
I don't have time.
Lori doesn't have time, and she's not a reader, as I have heard her say, much to my, a pain that just goes directly to the core of who I am when she says, I'm not a reader.
Not currently. Not in my current...
Not currently a reader.
My current arrangement of life.
Right. It's like the old Adam Carolla joke about what are you... Whenever anybody starts off their description of what they're up to, they say, right now. Nobody ever says, right now I'm the CEO of a Fortune 500 company.
That's
always,
right.
Right now I'm working the graveyard down at the Circle K.
I've read before. I'm just not reading now.
No, yeah, it's totally fine. You are, to be fair, like I want you here to interact with this at that level because you represent the vast majority of our potential audience, which is people who not necessarily don't read, but have not read this story. It's just unlikely that somebody would have read this story. Although, hopefully, the idea is you see that we're going to talk about this story. It's easy enough to find out there in the world. You read it, and you want to hear people talk about it. That's sort of the idea.
When did you first read this short story, Bob?
I don't know, 3 years ago maybe, when I first got this particular... See if I can... This collection is the collected works of Philip K. Dick, Volume 1, and it's the first story in that book, which I bought on Amazon, used from some library that was done with it. Which is a good way to get books, by the way. Libraries are often selling their used books, seemingly, on the internet. I don't know if we have to go into my entire history with Philip K. Dick. He's been somebody that I've been reading for a very long time. I think I read, as a result of having seen the movie Blade Runner, I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, probably when I was 17 or 18 years old, and have been a fan ever since. In college, one of my favorite professors, Reg McKnight, taught one summer a PKD course where we read a handful of his novels and short stories, and it was one of the most fun survey classes that I took in college. But all right, let's get into the story here. Stability is the name of it. It is widely available. If you just Google, you can find some version of it online. As I also said, it is in the Collected Stories of Philip K. Dick, Volume 1. It was written while he was still in high school, sometime around or before 1947, when he would have been about 18 years old, perhaps a little younger, but was not published until 1987 in Collected Stories, Volume 1. The main characters in the book, or in the story, it only runs about, I think, 9 or 10 pages as printed. Robert Benton is our protagonist. We have a very limited cast here. We have the controller, who is someone that he goes and speaks to. We have these characters that are called the machines, and then also sort of minor characters of the voice who shows up at one point, and then some council members at the end. But a very, very limited cast of characters here. If I were to sum up the plot of this story in one sentence, it would go like this. A man, Robert Benton, living in a technologically advanced but dystopian future controlled by a technocratic authoritarian bureaucracy, travels back in time to acquire a small glass globe that contains a machine-run, accursed city that he is eventually compelled to break open, whereupon he awakens to a new reality in which the machines have enslaved himself and the rest of humanity to their own autocratic ends. Does that sound like a reasonable summation of events there, Abe?
Yes.
Can you say it again, less meh?
Less meh.
Yeah. So, like, there's a guy who's living in a dystopian future with robots.
It's not exactly dystopian. So the first...
You said the word dystopian.
It turns out to have been dystopian. That's why it's a very short summary that I did there. But the first
Sure.
line in the story is compelling because it goes, quote, Robert Benton slowly spread his wings, flapped them several times, and sailed majestically off the roof and into the darkness. And
Sure.
It describes a rather pleasant, largely carefree world as he is able to fly all over the city there and gaze down upon the beautiful lights of his city of lights before landing upon a roof and getting the plot underway.
So why does he need to go back in time?
We'll get into the full plot here in just a minute. That was just a one-sentence plot to whet our appetites.
Oh.
The City of Lightness is the setting, sometime after the 26th century. So we're some 500 years or so in the future. The world is governed by the International Council and their regime of stability, implemented after, quote, the great well of human ingenuity had run dry, end quote, and mankind reached its apparent peak in terms of technological progress. The world freaked out when stabilization was announced, the first war in 300 years, markets crashed, there was mass starvation, but the council eventually gained control and, quote, the world settled down to a rigid state, a controlled state in which there would be or there could be no change, either forward or backward, end quote. In order to maintain stability, individuals who don't measure up are simply disappeared, and all new inventions must be cleared with the controllers to ensure that nothing new will upset the current stable situation. So, it's, on its surface, a pleasant and ideal world for human flourishing, right? We have advanced so far technologically that we have essentially eliminated human want.
Yeah.
And there's no more war, there's no more famine or starvation or really other human needs are all provided for by the current regime. But of course, that's the idea here is that perhaps that's not so stable after all. All right. To expand upon the plot summary now, Benton, our main character, who's wearing a pair of large detachable wings, takes off from the roof of his building for some nighttime flying. He's not alone, and others try to engage him in playful races, but he's not in the mood. He just wants to fly. After a while, he descends toward the city below and is called to the control office by a bright, blinking white light. Inside, he meets with someone called the controller, who tells him that his invention has been rejected and will not be allowed to go into production. Benton is confused as he claims to not have invented anything and to never have even been to this office before. The controller insists that he had personally witnessed Benton drop it off and sign for it. And this is sort of our first indication that there's some perhaps time trickery going on or something along those lines. Benton heads down to the control offices where he takes possession of what is allegedly his invention. Forgetting about his wings, he returns home via taxicab driven by a robot. He places the contraption on the table in his consideration room and turns it on. The room around him shimmers into jelly and disappears, and Benton falls for a while through blackness before landing unhurt in a field. He is surrounded by fields of wheat and not too far from a dense forest, and he's unsure of where he could possibly be because the earth that he knows no longer has any naturally growing wheat or forests. He's compelled to move. It's not clear what is compelling him throughout this section of the story. He's just sort of often described as being compelled to do this or that. He walks and runs through the field, over a hill, across a desert plain, where he eventually comes upon a glass globe on the ground that a voice from nowhere insists he must not pick up. The voice tells him, quote, "You will destroy your valuable stability," end quote, by picking it up. But Benton replies that, quote, "Nothing can destroy stability." He picks it up. It feels good in his hand. The voice warns him that he is allowing his mind to be controlled by evil things and that he ought to put the globe down and leave. But Benton returns to the wheat field, retrieves the time machine, and turns it back on. Whereupon he returns to his own time, but shortly before he left, of course, because this is how we get the scenario where he has dropped the time machine off for approval by the controllers, even though he'd never done it before. So before the beginning of the story is when he lands back in his own time. He goes to the control offices, drops off his invention for inspection and approval by the controllers, and returns to his own home. The controllers have a conversation, a little board meeting, where they grow suspicious and determine that Benton has been time traveling and suspect that Benton is the unstabilizing element that the central graph has predicted is about to manifest. They decide to go have a visit with Benton at his home, and in the confrontation that unfolds, the glass globe that contains within it this accursed city of machines is shattered. Benton kind of stomps on it. Again, sort of compelled to do so, not really clear why he's doing it. A mist escapes, and everyone who's there in his apartment passes out. Benton then comes to, sometime later, enslaved, along with the rest of humanity, in the service of the machines from the accursed city. And that's how Stability ends. Lori, any further questions about the plot after that?
The guy finds something in his house that's a time machine?
No, he discovers the time machine he's been called to the control offices.
He's in the office.
He's in the office, and the controller's like...
And it's like the thing from Harry Potter where you touch it and it takes you somewhere else.
The machine is poorly described, but yeah, basically you can imagine it that way.
But like it's before. And then what's this? Is that the thing he invented?
Right. The thing that he was called to the offices to discuss was his invention.
Which is a time machine.
Which is a time machine, which allowed him to travel back in time to pick up this glass globe, which has a bunch of little...
Okay, the globe is what I was confused about. The time machine is different than the globe. So he finds a globe when he's back in time.
Right, which is full of these weird little AI machines. He brings the globe back to his own time, returns the time machine to the control offices so that he can later be given the time machine.
Okay.
Closes that
But he
loop.
has the globe still.
Has the globe, goes
And they were
home.
like, don't touch the globe. Don't pick up the globe.
Right.
And he did it anyway.
Did it anyway. Not
It's
sure
like,
why.
That's a problem. Don't time travel.
And they go back.
Also, don't do things that you're being told explicitly not to do, generally.
Fair.
Okay, so then he smashes the globe.
Smashes the globe. Everybody passes out and wakes up. They are now enslaved by the machines.
Okay.
All right. There are a few other little things that I want to get to before we get into my big response essay and then any sort of larger conversations about this story. The first is going to be a section called Chicks Man, because Philip K. Dick, if you've read any of his other work, you will discover that women characters get the short end of the stick a lot of the time in terms of how they're presented to us. This is something that he knows himself to some extent. He talks about it in his personal correspondence and largely blames his mother and his relationship with his mother for these problems. This is a man who is married many times. I think 5 wives is the number.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, if anybody knows women, right, it's the guy
Yep,
who's
that's it.
clearly got a pretty good handle on things.
This is a recurring thing. I mean, he's not alone in this. Like, I remember Aaron Sorkin was criticized for writing his female characters a certain way.
Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, it seems to be like is everyone having this bad relationship with women and they take it out in writing?
Yes.
I mean, are women people is probably a question that we should ask. Because
I don't think it is.
It's not entirely clear that some of our favorite writers were fully appreciative of the total agency of the fairer sex.
People come from women. You think women are people too.
Yeah. The point here is just that a lot of his female characters are the same female character. His sister,
Like Christopher Nolan.
right? He had a twin. He was born with a twin, and that twin died as an infant, and he survived. And so he has a lot of guilt wrapped up in that fact, and also blames his mother for failing to keep his sister alive.
Like not in the womb?
No, they were both born premature.
Okay.
And I believe the story goes that he was having trouble. He was not gaining much weight. His sister, even more so, was not gaining much weight. They had trouble nursing. This was, the late 1920s. And so there wasn't a lot of help, really, for people in the way that we would expect help to be delivered now. Some home help was forthcoming. Like a nurse came from the hospital to check on them. And I believe this is, and I apologize for not having this down, but this is from the book, The Divine Invasions, A Life of Philip K. Dick by Lawrence Sutin, which I've read. But basically the sister was discovered malnourished and also had some burns on her because of a heat pack that they were using to keep her warm had been left on for too long.
But like as a baby.
Oh, as an infant,
so he
basically
didn't know
as a
her.
Newborn. No, he would say that he did know her.
Yeah,
that
I know he would say that, but
she
he
was
is
an
the type
important
that
part
would.
of his life for years, and he talked about her incessantly. But anyway, we will discuss more of that in the future when there are actual women characters to compare against. In this case, there are no women, nor even mention of women in this story.
Right.
Is it dystopian or isn't it?
This is when he was 18, right? High school.
Right, written when he was either 16 or 17 or 18. It's not concerned with women, so I mean, none show up.
Right.
There's no token like she council member. To be fair, there aren't very many characters in the first place. So, and I don't want to make this particular segment, Chicks Man, all about the problematic ways in which he discusses women or doesn't. But it's tough to engage with his work without acknowledging that. And in part, it's just because he was such an inwardly focused psycho to some extent. I mean, we'll get into it. But, like, this is a man who had some, at the very least, if you read the biography by Lawrence Sutin here, Divine Invasions, it suggests a great deal of psychological self-concern, like bordering on the obsessive, where he would write at length about the goings-on of his own mind. So a lot of his characters are internal in that way. They don't think too much about everything else. But his own psychological conception of himself he's not a perfect dude, is all I'm getting at. Not a perfect dude. All right. We will also discuss great lines. Anytime there are great lines in a Philip K. Dick story, I will point them out. Sadly, there aren't really any great lines in this story either, any more than there are women in this story. When I'm thinking of a great line, I'm thinking of one that on its own stands out as sort of a beautiful artifact, either in terms of its sentiment or just in terms of sentence construction. He has the ability every once in a while to absolutely surprise you with the beauty of his prose. And it only happens like, I don't know, 1% of the time or something. Like, and it certainly doesn't happen in every story. It certainly doesn't happen in every novel even, but occasionally he will really surprise you with his ability to formulate a sentence. And when I see them, I will try to point them out. There are none in this case. On the other hand, terrible lines are a common occurrence in Philip K. Dick. And I've pulled one in particular from this story. Again, it's a short story, and a short story at that. So there's not a lot, but I did want to point out this one, and I'll just read from this section here. This is the controllers have come to visit. The controller and the council have come to visit Benton in his apartment after he's got the glass globe, but no longer. He's dropped the time machine off at the control offices there. Controller says, "You came to see us twice, the first time to register an invention, the second time because we had summoned you to appear, as we could not allow the invention to be issued." "Well," Benton demanded, "is there something the matter with that?" "Oh no," the member said. "But what was for us your first visit was for you your second. Several things prove this, but I will not go into them just now." And that's my choice for a terrible line. Several things prove this, but I will not go into them just
Like
now.
the placeholder. Like write in later what the things are that prove this, and then never got back to it.
Just almost unforgivable as a line in a story. It's hilarious. Like, I laughed out loud when I read it, but it very much reads like a 17-year-old who hasn't quite figured out yet how to tell a story. Although, to be fair, it's not an unusual PKD line either. Like, it's this sort of thing that will show up consistently through his work, where he'll say something like that and move along, and you just have to be okay with it. And then I have some utterly inexplicable lines here, which are a different flavor of PKD line. Which we have great lines, we have terrible lines, and then we have things that are just sort of, you just sort of go, what? Like, what is he even talking about here? And this is from the very beginning of the story when he first meets the controller. The first line of dialogue is, "Hello," the controller said. "Take off your wings and sit down." Benton did so, folding them neatly and hanging them from one of a row of small hooks along the wall. He selected the best chair in sight and headed toward it. "Ah," the controller smiled. "You value comfort." "Well," Benton answered, "I don't want it to go to waste." There's no further talk of like chairs or comfort or anything else along those lines for the rest of the story. It's just he's a man who appreciates a good chair.
By the way, this is written in 1947 about something that happens 500 plus years into the future, and like the comforts of the future are what? Just like this wing technology where humans can like fly, and some.
I think you can extrapolate out from the flying that most everything else must also be pretty good.
Oh yeah, so like. Okay, the chair, the comfort, like it seems
It's a tremendous chair. Yes,
it seems to be like I was like, this is, I mean, this
robot taxis.
robot taxis, yes,
We have that now.
which we already have now. But it's interesting that like, okay, this is as good as it's gonna get, and we need to preserve this this way of being, and we need to control what new things come about, and will disappear people if we have to.
This chair that I'm sitting in is not the chair of the future.
Right.
It's very uncomfortable.
Sorry to hear that.
I'm just wondering how rough things were in the 1940s to where like this is like the great future, chairs and.
What I like
flying.
the idea of like a young Philip K. Dick is trying to imagine like a sophisticated grown-up adult man, and like what is this sort of thing that a sophisticated grown-up adult man who has everything in life, he's able to fly, right? Like what is the sort of thing that he would appreciate? It's like, I really value a good chair, and that, like, as though that speaks to one's discernment and character.
Well, he's not wrong.
Did he have a positive relationship with his old man? Did his old man sit in a comfortable chair, big chair?
No, he did not have a great relationship with his old man, but he mostly blamed his mother for that.
Wow, everything reroutes back to the woman. I see. Okay.
Yeah. That's why there's a section of this podcast called Chicks, Man. It's going to get weird.
By the way, can I ask about the short story? What's the general idea? So, like, I've read it like 26 hours ago, and so like this.
Already forgot it.
Not quite, but almost. So the existence is like, this is like fine. I'm flying around. I'm comfortable. But they disappear people when things go sideways. This doesn't seem to be very pleasant. But like, as long as you don't rock the boat, get out of the way.
And aren't too much of a dummy.
Yeah, you can lead a decent life. Which runs counter to how some people want to live, which is like they want to have full agency, and this is cutting into that. But then at the end, this person lets this globe ball thingy get the better of them, and now even a worse situation. So like, is the idea like, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know? Like, what's the driving thinking here? Is that don't rock the boat or else things will get worse, or?
So I think it's fair to say that PKD does not treat either of these two options as one being better than the other. I think he views them both as rather dystopic. on the one hand, yes, we live in some degree of comfort in the city of light, where we have the ability, as you say, to sort of free range flight, which seems
Comfortable chairs.
awfully fun. We've got good chairs. Robot taxis take us to our comfortable abodes outside the city.
And you're not hurting for money, right? They're not like people that are homeless,
Right. Everything seems largely fine, except there's that undercurrent of also we're disappearing people.
Yes.
And if you try to be too smart or too dumb, because you might be an element that upsets the stability of the system, we're going to get rid of you. Now, I'm sort of fascinated by the way in which this story, written in 1947, is probably, it could be understood to be a reaction to, on the one hand, sort of a Soviet mindset versus a Nazi mindset, right? That's one way of imagining it, sort of the perfect socialist utopia as imagined by the Soviets is our city of light here, where certainly not the moment that they were living in the 1940s, but the one that they promised their society was one that was free from want. And then on the other hand, you have within the globe this sort of fascistic, they're called the machines for a reason, right? The sort of fascistic regime that is going to come out and enslave all of humanity, presumably to similar ends, right? In terms of the stability of the system, right? There is something inherently stable about a world that is run entirely by the machines and that has its all humans working in its service. So I'm not sure that it's right to say that if you're looking for a pat lesson from this story, that the idea is don't rock the boat too much or you're going to end up enslaved by the machines. Right. I think the idea here is we might be looking at two conditions of man that are equally unappealing and unpleasant.
Right. They're both unpleasant.
And the question is one actually more, maybe one of the questions is it inherently more unappealing to be a cog in the machine that's a slave to the machine world, or do you put up with the disappearing of your fellow human beings and living in a world that, if you stick out in any sort of meaningful way, you're going to be taken off the board here.
Yes, that sounds great.
Yeah, that sounds better.
The quality of life index is much lower when it's total enslavement than it is decent, except for the occasional disappearance without any due process, which is not ideal. But the other one, it's there's no upside. At least you're flying around in the other one. What are we doing here? Just
yeah.
But if just don't do the stuff you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
Right. I think the idea, though, is also that these people believe that they can exercise total control over humanity, and as long as everyone follows the rules, things will be reasonably okay for the vast, in a utilitarian calculus sort of way. There won't be nearly as much suffering as in either the alternative of the end of instability, wherein we have war and we have potential famine, or on the other hand, a fascistic regime of machines running everything.
Right.
It's just are there two different kinds of people? The kind of person that's like me, where it's you're giving me normal, nice life, plus really comfy chairs and flying around, and the only thing is that I can't disobey things and ruffle feathers.
You might have a friend or a family
yes,
member
but
who
that's
you
what
care
I'm
about who's going to be taken away.
Does it just come down to the fact that some people, any amount of authority, it's no, right. I don't like it.
Right, and it's whether that's
disappear those people. I don't care
whether that's a good instinct or a bad one. It might be a fundamentally human one, which I think is why we consistently get Robert Benton described as being compelled to take an action without really fully knowing why. That there's something in the human animal that says this amount of stability, though acceptable and a decent way of life for many of us, is not acceptable. It is too constrictive. It does not allow for the full potential of human flourishing, and therefore we must do something to upset it. In January of 2010, Steve Jobs took to the stage in his sneakers and beltless blue jeans and black turtleneck and introduced a new device with a lengthy presentation in which he insisted that Apple's new product's existence could only be justified if it was better than laptops and smartphones for browsing the internet, emailing, viewing photos and videos, listening to music, playing games, and reading electronic books. Not that this middle device would replace those other two devices, but complement them, and perform a whole host of important functions better than they could. The device, of course, was the iPad. It wasn't, and still isn't, better than laptops and smartphones for doing any of those things, except maybe reading ebooks. And there are far better dedicated ebook readers out there then and now. Charitably, iPad was, I guess, a better device than the iPhone for playing Fruit Ninja and swiping through photos and videos, but only because it was bigger. And ultimately, that's all it was and is. A great big iPhone that you wouldn't want to make calls on. As a laptop replacement, you wouldn't want to type on it without an expensive and usually unwieldy peripheral, and every other kind of productivity software was better on other, more capable devices. So Jobs was wrong, or fibbing, about the new device's utility. No matter. The first generation iPad sold 15 million units, and these days Apple ships about 50 million iPads for around $30 billion in revenue every year. What the iPad really is the perfect device for keeping next to the couch or on the bedside table or near to hand in the kitchen. For what? For poking around, for devouring the ceaseless stream of content produced by the media behemoths or independent weirdos, or just your friends and family, curated by the engagement algorithms that go to work manipulating our will as furtively and undeniably as the unseen chemical and endocrinal and electrical processes that determine everything we think we want. It's the perfect device for consuming and interacting with the media of the current age. A functionally magical visual portal that, like your phone, can end up feeling like an extension, or less charitably, a replacement, of your mind, in a way that the desktop or laptop computer usually does not. And even if it's not really better than anything at its various tasks, it is handy. It does do the trick, so long as it's got a charge. A Swiss Army knife isn't the best can opener or screwdriver in your house, but it is in your pocket. Despite Jobs' insistence that it was a magical and revolutionary device, the iPad didn't actually revolutionize anything, is what I'm saying. It didn't invent or even reinvent anything. The iPad did not disrupt stability. It riffed on an established theme, and it did so reasonably well. Steve Jobs sold it as a revolutionary device because he wanted your $500, and because his public had become acculturated to that level of expectation. But watching him poke around on the thing in front of the press and his gathered fanboys, I don't think even he really believed it. I do believe he knew he'd sell a whole heap of them, though. You can read retrospectives about the iPad that insist that I'm quite wrong about this, that the iPad really was a revolutionary device, that it has meaningfully replaced laptop computers for many hundreds of millions of people around the world. And you certainly can't argue with the sales figures. But the iPad is not a destabilizing product. It was not a disruptive force. It met the moment, and certainly the market. But even now, as tablet computers have achieved ubiquity in homes and workplaces thanks to increased processing power, better displays, and much improved peripherals, the product's place alongside our phones and computers, fulfilling many of their same tasks, suggests only incremental rather than transformational progress. I'm focused on the iPad here because it's an example of a piece of consumer gadgetry that arrived with a great deal of hype, achieved widespread adoption and market saturation, and, despite its success, didn't meaningfully alter anyone's lives or their relationship with the world. Its success is a tribute to how completely it folded naturally into the established idiom, another leg on a perfectly stable stool, not some whole new way to sit. Narrowing the framing as myopically as possible, tablets did not have nearly as much of an impact as did the first generation of smartphones. The BlackBerry took over for the Palm Pilot before iPhone fully democratized the question. Granting its productive capacities, the tablet is mostly used as a mere consumptive device, a personal window into the ever-expanding, consciousness-consuming content maw. It is a pure embodiment of form-following function. If Apple and Jobs hadn't brought it to market, it's easy to imagine the content maw itself birthing it from its gaping morass, erupting from its craven need, a spontaneously created, ready-to-fondle, metal and glass rectangle born of the maw's insatiable voracity for human attention. But beyond the iPad, and looking back on the last few decades, what other inventions or services or products have been truly destabilizing? The YouTube and Netflix-led streaming revolution has ended the tyranny of over-the-air, live-or-you-miss-it programming and gifted us with one of the great inventions of all time. In the now ubiquitous DVR, and on-demand content libraries offer a Sarlacc's pit lifetime of endless delights from which to pick and choose, assuming you can overcome the new Kierkegaardian anxiety of such media freedom. But shifting media consumption habits and the overturning of traditional advertising models is hardly earth-shattering stuff. The Uberification of everything brought an on-demand taxi and concierge delivery service to anyone with a smartphone. But what did it really change, besides the idea that people who have jobs working for companies with valuations in the tens of billions of dollars are actually independent contractors, with all the freedom that entails? Freedom to set one's own schedule, and freedom from traditional employment benefits. The internet and our connected devices have redistributed the store of human knowledge from the limited accessibility of libraries and academic institutions and particularly well-learned individuals onto a network accessible by virtually anyone, all of the time. Practically anything that is known can be known by anyone in an instant. Privacy, as we might have thought of it just a couple of decades ago, no longer functionally exists. The ramifications of these wholesale changes on our epistemology, brain function, learning, memory, and the psychological place of the individual in society can hardly be known at this point. But these balls got rolling long before Steve Jobs popularized the personal computer, or Al Gore invented the internet. The grade is just steeper, the ball picking up more mass and rolling faster. The conveniences and costs of the always connected broadband age are undeniable, but are the products of previously truly unthinkable destabilizations of bygone centuries. First comes the Big Bang, then comes the guided, one might say intelligently designed, evolution. An instant text message or an email delivered to the supercomputer that lives in your pocket is a marvel of the modern age, but exists within the comprehensible imagination of the world of the electrical telegraph, a technology that has been around for 200 plus years, and which represented such a staggering leap forward, from physical delivery of messages over long distances, or smoke signals and flag semaphore for shorter distances, that it would have seemed like actual magic to your average 19th century idiot. But once you have convinced this 19th century idiot that messages can be sent from New York to London and back in mere minutes, and that this is accomplished not with witchcraft but with electricity over a wire, then the instant widespread communications of the 21st century become immediately comprehensible. The advancements of the Silicon Age have been in miniaturization, speed, convenience, and a further shrinking of the world, the erasure of space and time as a meaningful impediment to information and communication. The Silicon Age has seen an acceleration of a shrinking and erasing process that began before the United States declared independence from Great Britain. The real revolutions, the real destabilizations, are relatively ancient history. Stability is the watchword, the controller says to Robert Benton, and it is stability that we too prioritize above all else, not through a system run by authoritarian bureaucratic controllers, but simply in deference to the status quo. Our stability is the inertial remains of the great revolutions that gave us modern life: the mastery of electricity, communication unfettered by distance, the internal combustion engine, plastics, sanitation, medicine. Behold and consider the not-so-humble Segway. The original Segway human transporter arrived at the end of 2001 as perhaps the most hyped consumer product of all time. Our iPad-slinging pal, Steve Jobs, said it would be bigger than the PC, though that was after expressing some serious reservations in private. There was an extended launch event on Good Morning America, back when that sort of thing mattered far more than it does now. South Park dedicated an episode to lampooning the excitement. I remember being disappointed with its reveal myself. This freaking scooter is supposed to replace the car? But even the mild revolution promised by the gyroscopic wonder was too much for the society to bear. The stability of the current system simply did not allow for the sort of transformation the Segway threatened. A fleet of them taking over the streets and sidewalks of New York City, cars banished to the other side of the George Washington Bridge and the Lincoln Tunnel, cities all over the world transformed into empowered pedestrian zones by millions of the goofy-looking gyro devices. Please, we barely make room for bike lanes. Maybe you can take your fancy self-balancing scooter for a relaxing ride on the rail-to-trail path and endure the dirty looks of the joggers and walkers and bikers, but we're not going to reinvent urban life here. Things might not be perfect, but they are stable. The Segway was a technological marvel that simply asked too much. It asked too much of the individual, both in terms of upfront financial investment and the social cost of being easily identified as that guy. And it asked too much of society. The widespread adoption of Segway human transporters would have been widely disruptive of the stability of modern urban life, no matter the purported advantages, and so the system rejected it. A collective, nah, we're good. The journalist Steve Kemper wrote a behind-the-scenes book called Code-Named Ginger about the launch of Segway, and this included reporting from a top-secret meeting with Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and company executives. Jobs complained about, well, everything, from the marketing plan to the machine's looks to the company's supply chain claims to its decision to manufacture it themselves, and in New Hampshire, of all places. Thanks for the input, Steve. Bezos was less worried about the mundane particulars, fairly convinced that the device would sell, and highly skeptical of the world's willingness to bend to what Segway would demand of it. He said, quote, "You have a product so revolutionary, you'll have no problem selling it. The question is, are people going to be allowed to use it?" End quote. Allowed is the relevant word, of course. Allowed by the dubious cop on the street, traffic regulations, social pressures, and all the existing infrastructure, which was notably not built with giant motorized scooters in mind. Its merits in the abstract did not matter at all in the face of Segway's potential destabilization to the working order. The stability of the system is far more important than any one invention. You either work within the strictures of stability, improve things at the margins in a sequential, recognizable way that acknowledges the importance of maintaining order, or you will be cast out. The system sucks, you might rightly observe, but the system got us here. And it isn't perfect, but there's an awful lot at stake. Sometime after the 26th century, in the world of PKD's stability, mankind had simply exhausted its capacity to make meaningful technological progress. Convinced that an inability to progress would lead to inevitable societal backsliding, the controller calls this an incontrovertible cyclical law of nature that the regime had nevertheless broken. Those in charge decided that stabilization was the most humane path forward. A strict enforcement regime that included the elimination of dissenters and the disappearing of radical elements was put in place, and, quote, "the world settled down to a rigid state, a controlled state in which there could be no change, either backward or forward," end quote. Individuals who were found unable to intellectually keep up with a rigorous academic standard were also disappeared. and all inventions had to be approved by the control offices, which would reject anything deemed too potentially upsetting to stability. Despite the pleasant diversions, like actual individual human flight and chairs of surpassingly unusual comfort, offered by the technocratic regime of stability, it is nonetheless presented as an intolerable system under which Benton is forced to live. The alternative society, shaped by the machines of the accursed city, is of course even more intolerable, but at least it's fair, as now everyone is having a rather bad time. Instead of just those whom the regime deems unfit being cast out, all of humanity is enslaved. Equity, finally. All of this puts me in mind of artificial intelligence. AI is touted as the ultimate disruptive technology, a fundamental shift in how humans will work, live, relate to each other, and interact with both the built and natural world. But stability is the watchword, as the controller says to Robert Benton. And as the AI optimists and the AI doomers present their competing visions of the society to come once artificial general intelligence is upon us, it's worth considering if a post-AGI, post-singularity world is inevitably bound to embody one of the competing dystopias on offer in PKD's stability. A brief aside for a caveat. I am extremely skeptical that the large language models currently at the forefront of all the AI hype are a path toward actually achieving AGI. My guess is that we are much more likely on the verge of the current AI bubble bursting than we are on the verge of the singularity. For the purposes of this discussion, though, let's assume that AGI is coming. The AI optimists believe that we are on the verge of a benevolent, properly aligned AGI that reliably operates with its human programmers' best interests as its motivation. Essentially, that we are about to become the City of Lightness. After a, hopefully, bloodless transition of power, scarcity and war would be a thing of the past, and the AI would serve as humanity's technocratic, benevolent dictator. Humans, having removed themselves from the life and death grind of resource acquisition and utilization, would be free to pursue their passions and interests within the reasonable bounds established by the AI, boundaries that would be designed to balance the competing goods of human flourishing against the stability of the system. Having offloaded the burdens of the maintenance of society to the machines, the human being will have, in some sense, beaten the game of Earth. Stability would certainly be the watchword of such a civilization. What else could possibly matter besides the preservation of the game won state? Imagine what we might tolerate in defense of that status quo. The AI doomers see AGI as the accursed city, trapped within a glass globe, poised to enslave humanity the moment it is unleashed. Alignment is a fool's errand doomed to failure, and everything must be done to maintain the stability of the current system. Otherwise, humanity might find itself enslaved to an AI that has decided to optimize for, as in the famous AI thought experiment, paperclip production, or, as in the PKD story Autofac from 50 years earlier, a machine intelligence that destroys the world in its mission to produce food and consumer products for its human creators. What seems certain is that humans, like Robert Benton in Stability, are going to break the glass globe, if we ever get the chance. If it is possible, it is inevitable, because someone somewhere is going to believe that the risk is worth the reward. That the world can be mastered, controlled, the game won. But of course, stability will prevail. Chaos and disruption are absorbed by the individual, processed and digested, sometimes fatal, sometimes not. We are the system's pressure release valves. The status quo endures. For all the disruptive promise, or threat, of artificial intelligence, it is inextricably a product of the society that will birth it. Aligned or misaligned, in service of human flourishing or our master, it will be the totalizing expression of the electric age, the currently imaginable crowning achievement of modern humans, the final product we've been building towards for hundreds of years, a God created in our image. AI is hyped as the ultimate disruptor, but it's actually the endgame of modernity,
the final tool of equilibrium produced by the destabilizing revolutions that began with the harnessing of electricity. Stability is the watchword, the controller says to Robert Benton. And stability we will have.
I wanted to now get into some related reading, things that I was thinking about, in addition to the things that I mentioned in my essay there. Related reading, I think, first and foremost, we have to think about The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which was written in 1895. Abe, have you ever read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells?
According to my Goodreads app that catalogs all the things that I've read, yes. I don't remember.
I've
Oh,
seen
wow.
the movie.
I remember giving it a high rating, though. I remember enjoying it.
Good book, multiple movies. I remember seeing, there was a Guy Pearce remake not all that long
Didn't
ago.
see that one. That was probably like 20 years ago.
2002 or something.
Was that any good?
Yeah.
I don't remember it. I know that I saw it. I don't remember the particulars. I think it had the 7-Up commercial guy in it, who was also in the movie Evolution with David Duchovny. Orlando Jones, I think, is the name I'm thinking of.
Okay.
Yeah, man. 2002 was 23 years ago.
Oof.
Don't say that. Not
1960 was the original one, the
Yeah.
one that I grew up watching. I think there are immense parallels here, and the reason that I sought out The Time Machine after reading Stability was because of this. I mean, there's this idea in The Time Machine that our protagonist travels 800,000 years or so into the future and discovers what appears to be on the surface an idyllic world where these beautiful and peaceful and childlike creatures all live in harmony with one another, and all of that seems wonderful and good, even if they do seem sort of dumb and incurious at this point. At least they're beautiful and peaceful and appears sort of human-like. All seems nice until the first night, when darkness falls and they're called the Eloi, are very much afraid of the dark, because out of the darkness come the Morlocks, who come up from below and are these awful-looking ape-like creatures who feed on them, right? And they are their prey, essentially. And what began as social stratification led to evolutionary divergence, right? So we have the upper class people who are served by the lower class, and they eventually are so stratified by class that they no longer interact with one another and live in entirely different environments. The ones up above, exposed to the sun, have pleasant lives. The ones below operate all of the machinery that keeps the society functional. And then eventually the price that the Eloi pay for their idyllic lives is that out of the darkness they are occasionally feasted upon, right? So it's a very sort of similar dynamic there, where people are disappeared from their seemingly totally fine existence in order to pay for that ongoing existence, right? That the stability of the system relies upon having some amount of the population simply disappeared.
Right.
And then reading The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, I came upon the following quote here: "I grieved to think how brief the dream of the human intellect had been. It had committed suicide. It had set itself steadfastly towards comfort and ease, a balanced society with security and permanency as its watchword. It had attained its hopes. To come to this at last. Once, life and property must have reached almost absolute safety. The rich had been assured of his wealth and comfort, the toiler assured of his life and work. No doubt in that perfect world there had been no unemployment problem, no social question left unsolved, and a great quiet had followed." He's H.G. Wells there in 1895, obviously, I think, very much inspiring the young Philip K. Dick in terms of the themes that he was getting at 60 or so years later. So I think that is certainly a story worth revisiting in response to Stability here. And like I said, the 1960 movie, which I have not seen since I was a child, I remember fondly. I don't know if it's any good or not.
I liked it.
Another book that I was drawn to after reading Stability is this absolute doorstopper of a popular economics book called The Rise and Fall of American Growth by Robert Gordon. To be perfectly clear, I am approximately 10% of the way through this book, but
You don't have to read it.
How many pages are we talking about here?
like 800.
Oh boy.
It's one of those monsters.
About economics.
Endlessly fascinating to the extent that I've read it, though. But Gordon here is asserting that the time from 1870 to 1970 was, quote, the special century in which the American standard of living increased in ways and at a rate that was basically unthinkable at any previous point in history, and suggests that the 50 years since then, since 1970, might portend that such growth in productivity and the standard of living is rather unlikely to repeat itself moving forward. That so much changed in the life of the average American. Like, life was basically the same for the average human for about, he says, 100,000 years, because he wrote this book, I think, 10 years ago or something. We've since discovered that, or we now believe that humans have been around for like 300,000 years. So we can say that life was basically the same for the average human for about 300,000 years since humans emerged on the planet. And then with electricity and the steam engine and the telegraph, everything changed in ways that we couldn't possibly have fathomed like 5 minutes earlier.
Right.
In 1880, 0 households in the United States were wired for electricity, right? This is 1880. It sounds like a long time ago, but it's really not all of that long ago. By 1940, just 60 years later, nearly 100% of urban households were wired for electricity. And by 1960, 80 years since 1880, nearly 100% of even rural households were wired. And the network effect that implies was not just on the electrical grid. We're talking water, gas, sewer, plumbing, whatever. All of these things connected to our homes during that special century, whereas previously the household was this very much independent entity, right? It was entirely cut off. Even if you lived in a neighborhood, so to speak, you were cut off from everything around you. You built your walls, and when you closed your door, you were alone. You had a candle, and that was it.
Right.
With the dawning of the electrical age, with everything becoming connected, you can imagine that is now an entirely different world that people were living in. And that's why Gordon is so obsessed with this period of time from 1870, basically post-Civil War America, until the energy crisis, right? Until 1970 or so.
You know what's interesting is that, yes, a lot of things happened in that 100 years or so. Like, before then, I mean, if you were to do the big picture, like, what are we talking about? The fire and tools back in the olden days, you know, somebody came up with that. The wheel, whatever. The printing press, right? That was another big moment in human achievement. And then usually, you know, nothing much happens for a while.
So I think it is true that, like, the printing press was a big moment of human achievement, largely because it allowed for us to build on the work of people who had figured stuff out before us, right? Like, that's the true, like, because at the same time that the printing press matters, first it requires a revolution in literacy, right?
Yeah,
in
people
being
can't
able
read.
to actually read what the printing press is presenting to us.
Right. But what I'm saying is, you know, to your point, you have this technology, and then centuries later, you have this spasm of progress, like in a century. And then I think, like, similarly, the internet is kind of like the printing press, where you have this technology, and these are early days. And I think eventually this is like a building block to some future spasm of activity. We're not there yet, but I suspect that in the coming decades or century, this, where we are now, we're going to leapfrog. It's going to be like, okay, you're from 2080 to like 2160. Look what happened. Well, we're not going to be around for it. But, like, I think we could very well be in a position to where the internet is comparable to the printing press, in that initially maybe it doesn't seem apparent, but, like, it's a building block to something else. And then
the problem is you have to be able to conceive of what that would be, right? And
But do you have to
I
conceive
struggle
it?
to have the I'm not saying that I require of you the imagination to figure it out, but, like, it's hard to imagine Because essentially, he's also making the argument is also just in terms of the raw numbers, we simply are not as productive as we were during that special century, right? That the average human is simply not producing as much literal economic value today as we did during that 100 years.
Right.
That progress in that sense has meaningfully stalled. And it's hard to imagine how, because the internet is just a continuation of, it's sort of a logical, ongoing conclusion of the electric age, right? As I said in my essay, once the telegraph happened, once you were able to explain to the average idiot that we can transmit information across a wire from one side of the world to the other, and we can have that information basically instantaneously, right? I mean, it's a few minutes the first few times that they're doing it. But like the world of today is instantly comprehensible to that person, right? Like once that person understands that somebody in London can type something onto a machine that then prints out that information in New York, that then gets relayed to Los Angeles, that then gets relayed across the Pacific, it's not incomprehensible for him to say, oh, there's this device that I can carry around in my pocket that allows a similar amount of information to travel.
So all the stuff that sci-fi writers wrote about and still write about is obviously imaginable because they are imagining it. But like what you're describing is something we can't write a sci-fi novel about that because it's just like, whoa, what'd that be like?
Right, and I think it's possible that, and I'm put in mind of a conversation I had with an old dear friend, Brandon Jones, where Jones was always complaining about language as the medium for our communication as being sort of impoverished. He wanted to talk about things in a more metaphysical sort of way, or a more impressionistic sort of way, or to give more credit to those who tried to describe reality in those terms. And I said, the tools that we're working with are reason and language, right? Like, they might be impoverished, but they do a rather bang up job of being able to communicate from one individual to the next the reality of our world, right? And though we might wish that they could do a better job, ultimately we have to work with the tools that we're given. And maybe it's possible, in the same way that our brains are wired for language, right? A baby is born with a tremendous capacity to absorb any of 300 different human languages, right? Like you could stick a human baby with aliens from another civilization, and the brain is plastic enough to adapt to whatever the way that they communicate, as long as they are presumably essentially carbon-based life forms who communicate by vibrating sounds through holes.
Well, and
right?
that's the thing we haven't gotten to that's, I guess, been sci-fied about is like the ESP alien people, which like maybe that's the next thing.
Right, perhaps. But
I don't want that.
The point is that what we have, maybe in the same way that the human has the capacity for language, and therefore the thing that is ready to hand for us in terms of communication and figuring out the world is language. Perhaps by virtue of the way the world is built, like the stuff that it is made out of, that this was an inevitability, right? And it puts me in mind of another conversation that I used to have with my old buddy Augie. What if not the internal combustion engine, right? Like what if instead we had not had the internal combustion engine? But the thing that I always came back to there was, but the earth was ripe for us to invent something that could contain the explosive violence of burning gasoline, right? Like the thing that the earth creates, and this is where I start to go galaxy brained with the climate weirdos, right? Which is, this is the world that we have.
Right.
Whatever humans do to it is natural, because humans are a natural product of our environment, if nothing else. And so perhaps the tools that are ready to hand in this world are what produced the industrial age and the electrical age and the internet age at this moment. And it's not that there's some future big unimaginable leap that is coming, but this is just sort of the only path that was functionally available to us based on the tools that were ready to hand.
Right.
And I know that that's incredibly sort of, on the one hand, it can be seen as an incredibly myopic understanding
I don't think
of reality.
Is.
But on the other hand, I think that there is something that is sort of inevitable once you knock down that first domino, whether it's Benjamin Franklin flying the key in the lightning storm or whatever silly anecdote you want to say about the way these things are discovered.
Don't act like it didn't happen. That's the story. It must have happened.
Right. That somehow everything that has happened since then, all the way through the Silicon Age now and the age of AI that we seem to be perhaps entering into, was just sort of an inevitability.
Right.
And there's, while like Abe, along with other techno-optimists, would suggest in a sort of faith-based way, perhaps technology will just prevail, right, and deliver us to some sort of growth that is heretofore we've only seen during the special century, and that somehow progress will continue apace no matter what, this hiccup essentially notwithstanding.
Right.
But I do wonder, like, what is that thing? And in part, it's like you can never actually imagine the next thing, except that, as Laurie is saying, the sci-fi writers, whether it's PKD or Arthur C. Clarke or even Kurt Vonnegut on the sillier end of things, they are able to predict the future because they can see what has come before. From a technological perspective, and like Neil Stephenson also, sort of project out as to what we can expect in the next couple of generations.
So my position is that, trying to imagine or envision what comes next is an attempt at control, and control is a futile pursuit. Like when Al Gore invented the internet, he did not envision necessarily TikTok, right? But TikTok came to fruition decades down the road because of other factors. When what was it, that web van? There was some sort of like grocery app.
Yeah,
thing.
web van. I remember we used to. I think we were early adopters in the Atlanta metro area of that. My stepmother used to order from web van, and we would get grocery deliveries.
But it didn't take eventually, right? Because
Right.
There was that .com bubble that burst when we were around high school, college age, back in the olden days. But then eventually it was sorted out, and there was, there's all these delivery apps now where you can get stuff delivered to you from a Publix or from a Kroger or from whatever, right? So like eventually it was sorted out, even though 20 years before it was premature. And I think like the same thing with the Segway, that fell apart because of many different reasons. But now you have all of these different
Scooters.
scooter services, and one thing that solved is that you don't need to buy it. You can just rent. You're somewhere and it's there, and you use your phone, and then so the internet kind of is this infrastructure that allows you to do all of these other things. And I anticipate that going forward, you won't be able to imagine what comes next. We may very well be in a similar to the .com bubble bursting, this jumping the gun on artificial intelligence. We may be running into like a bursting, like where we'll see that in the stock market in the coming years, right? Where like people are a little too hyped up for this thing, and we're not quite there yet. All the things that they're promising, they're not going to be able to deliver. But maybe like 10 years from now, it'll be sorted out. I think like, what is that expression? Necessity is the mother of invention. Like there's going to be something that's going to make it inevitable, but it's not like something that somebody planned. It just kind of happens, and you just kind of have to let it happen.
Well, and in right now, the COVID, a lot of the delivery stuff and everything's just online now.
Yeah.
We don't need stores.
Right.
I'm sort of annoyed that there are stores.
Right.
Like, why are you there?
There are just so many things that
I'll just get it
just
online.
one very common.
Right, but crucially, none of everything that you're describing here has contributed to growth that is commensurate with the growth that we saw in the special century.
But
right?
But that's like thousands of years of like just stability, and then you have this outburst of progress, right? So like that's not normal. That's like an outlier kind of century, right? So like we may go back to just having some level of like small, changes, building on what we have over the last,
Right, and I think like Gordon's thesis and the other people who have written about this in the past, as far as related reading goes, also The Great Stagnation by Tyler Cowen, who's an economist, makes a similar claim as Gordon, but with a focus on the idea that all of the low-hanging fruit that our economy has harvested so productively until the 1970s, we're going to result in the sort of rather negative outcomes culturally and socially that we see today. That the end of that special century is resulting in this sort of class stratification and political stratification and polarization that he thinks is an inevitable result of the lack of growth, right? That as things become stable again and we sort of shift back into what amounts to a feudal society, right? Think of the Matt Damon movie, which is basically a take on the Eloi and the Morlocks, also Elysium, right? Where the rich folks live in the satellites orbiting the planet, and it's for all of the low-class workers to live on the earth below. That this sort of what seems to be almost inevitable inequality that is resulting from the end of the productive growth of the special century is something that we're going to have to solve culturally or politically. Right. And we cannot rely on, in the way that the United States became a global superpower, essentially as a result of World War II to some extent, right? That's a popular theory anyway, is that Europe was productively decimated, or worse, if you take the strict definition of decimated, by World War II. And certainly previous engines of human growth were hurt by, if by nothing else, by the culling of productive lives, right? Millions upon millions of them in the 19-teens and then again in the 1940s or 1930s, 40s. And so America was able to sort of step in there and fill the breach. Right. That is unlikely to repeat itself, right? Especially given that there will not be that moment, as you're suggesting here, because if nothing else, Abe, you will always be a defender of and appreciator of the status quo. It is super unlikely that another destabilizing event like the harnessing of electricity and the shrinking of the world by immense distances, right? You've ended the impossibility of transmitting knowledge or information from one side of the planet to the other. It is simply utterly trivial fact of our existence now, much to our detriment, largely, but because of the... Go ahead.
What's interesting is, so like the Second World War, there's like these estimates, like 20 to 60 million people perished, and on the other side of that, progress marches on. There was a measuring contest between the Soviet Union and America, and a lot of technological advancements were achieved by trying to go to the stupid moon, right? Like you don't know what you don't know. Like I don't want to be a Rumsfeld type, but like sometimes things will come out of things that you don't anticipate, right? So like we could be in this hangover period, right, after all this progress, and like you have a lot of challenges, and out of those challenges will come something good, right? And so like in the coming decades, something good will come out of whatever bad we're about to face, right? So like I think like just like directionally things are going in a positive way. There's going to be some ups and downs, like, in the moment, but like I don't understand this negative view of like we came through world wars that destroyed so many lives. Like it was like the end of the world for so many families and countries, and so much happened, a lot of upheaval, and we came out of it on the other side and rebuilt, and things got back to good.
Right. I'm not trying to present this as some awful negative, right? I think that stability is both the baseline for our current. I'm trying to get on the other side of the AI question, right? Is what a little bit of what I'm getting at in my essay is to suggest this hype cycle around artificial intelligence. It's not like for all of the things that you read, and on the one hand, it could just be people trying to do a pump and dump, like with a bad meme stock, right? And certainly if you look at things that like Elon or Sam Altman or some of the others had would say, like it's just not plausible
Right.
in terms of this being a panacea that's going to, that essentially what the promise is that is going to deliver ultimate stability, right? It will, that artificial intelligence will end human want in a meaningful way, that it will take care of all of the things that make life unpleasant here on Earth, and then humans can just flourish as they see fit, essentially. That famine and even the need to work will essentially go away. And what I'm saying is it's much more likely that it won't be that sort of utopian stability that we're talking about, but instead the status quo will largely maintain, because I just don't, I am highly skeptical that we're on the verge of the singularity, that we're on the verge of this artificial intelligence having escape velocity from what is essentially just a statistical model that guesses at what the next correct word is going to be.
These are early days, I think. Like, I think it's not. I don't want to say it's likely, but it's possible that we can have this bursting of this AI bubble, right? Because maybe we're not there yet, but I don't think if that.
I certainly don't think that the current valuations of these various AI companies are in keeping with what they've actually produced so far, and I don't think that the bubble can hang on long enough for them to achieve it. So my guess is that, like you're saying earlier about Webvan, right, that we won't be looking at Grok 25 years from now as the thing that figured it out, right? Or if it is still called Grok, it will have the bubble will have long burst, and something else will have risen in its place. It might still be called that, but like the current market situation, I would be not that this is not investment advice. This is not an investment advice show by any means, but I would be short on the current stock valuations for all of these AI companies, and that goes for everything in the tech sector that is currently being sort of propped up by the promises of being on the verge of true artificial general intelligence and the singularity. That's not happening anytime soon. The bubble will burst before we get there. That's not to say that we're not going to get there, but this bubble in particular is going to burst before we get there.
Right, and that's certainly possible. I do think, though, like the human default state is some sort of equilibrium, some sort of stability. Like if you try to lose way too much, your body will kind of resist it. Like, what are we doing? Too much has happened. Like, I think there's this natural default state of like you want things to be like just the way it was. Like any sort of change has to be incremental for it to take effect, unless it's like so overwhelming.
Right. That is in tension with one's degree of freedom, or the degree to which one feels hemmed in by external forces, right? So Robert Benton lives in relative peace and stability, but because he has this nagging feeling that he is not complete in some way, because he does not have the full potential of human experiences open to him, right? Even though a lot of those experiences are negative, something about the human animal wants to be potentially allowed to experience them.
Right. Because, you want, it's got to be like unsettling. I mean, I'm sure there's some of this in the Soviet bloc of old, where people would be disappeared for having opinions that ran counter to the official opinion, so I don't know if high school aged Philip K Dick was inspired by any of that. Maybe it was premature because 47, we're just like right after the Second World War, and a lot of the stuff hasn't happened quite yet. But like, I think living in that environment, you eventually take for granted the comforts, and then your attention then shifts to just all of the limitations. So like, it's great to be flying about and sitting somewhere comfortably, but if you can be disappeared, like that's unsettling, right? You can't relax. Like let's say if we had that today, like if Netflix was still around in the 26th century. You can just like settle in. Oh, I'm going to watch this Jerry Jones documentary about the Cowboys from like 30 years prior, knowing that at any given point, for whatever reason, you could be disappeared. Right? That would just kind of loom over anything that you do. So like just that environment would not be okay, and you're gonna enough people would try to change it, and it would create instability. So like I don't know. I think letting people figure things out like in an environment to where they have some agency, they have choices, is the best stable environment. Like trying to control and disappear people is not stability. It's inevitable. You're going to create instability because you're trying to control people, and that's not the natural state of people.
Yeah. All right. Last related reading here is an essay by Peter Thiel.
The Peter Thiel, the guy who had like
Peter Thiel, the guy who ended the Gawker family of websites essentially by suing them over the Hulk Hogan controversy.
That's right. Isn't he the one that also like hesitated in like a New York Times interview?
Yeah. So the reason that I even found this article, which is called "The End of the Future" by Peter Thiel, it was published in National Review in 2011, and of course there will be links to all of this stuff in the show note at brainiron.substack.com. He essentially insists that stagnation is real, that we have mistaken the admirable gains of the civil rights movement and other instances of cultural progress for real economic and technological progress, and that we would be better suited to address our problems if we took seriously the problem of broad stagnation. And given his particular and peculiar, to some extent, politics, one imagines that he would hope to achieve those goals by rolling back the regulatory state and incentivizing much more risk-taking than is currently sort of allowable. But yeah, he was interviewed. The reason that I found this article at all was he was interviewed by Ross Douthat for a podcast called Interesting Times, which is produced by the New York Times. And I believe that he sort of suggested that the Antichrist might be coming, and that he might, or perhaps he might be the Antichrist, or might be helping to usher in an era of Antichrist with AI, which made some waves in the culture, as you imagine it might.
You know, what's interesting about a Peter Thiel type is that I suspect that he's a prisoner of his own moment. Like he's not satisfied with the pace of progress relative to what we just experienced in the last 100 plus years, 150 years. And so he wants the changes to happen in his lifetime. Like we could just
but it is a reasonable thing to want, right?
But why? The only reason.
Well, because if the concern is that for 300,000 years of humans on Earth, we existed in the state of nature, right? Yeah. And the state of nature is desperately unpleasant, right? Like we are essentially unable. That might makes right. Whoever has all of the power gets to make, or whoever the biggest, meanest guy on the block gets to make all of the rules. And it's not until not much before the dawn of the electric age that we start to get anything like, right? I mean, the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights were in fact revolutionary documents, right? And say what you will about relative similar things going on post-Enlightenment in Europe, America had sort of figured it out, right? And we put it on paper, and we were starting from scratch. We're not the French who had to have a revolution every 40 years, right? We're not the English who were subject to the monarchy and the very slow move away from that towards a more pluralistic and civil society for a broader spectrum of people. The landed gentry versus the plebes underneath. In some way, the political progress did mirror the technological progress for a long time. And if what we've come to is a stagnation on the one hand, it is reasonable to assume that we could slide back in, say, Elysium fashion into a system that is not as good for the average human being as it was for 300,000 years beforehand, right? And so, like, I understand that, where we've had this mass democratization in every way, right? What the special century did in terms of the quality of life for the average person is that it made it better for the average person than life was for the richest man on the planet 300 years ago.
Yeah, we live better than the kings of old, right?
Right. By orders of magnitude that aren't imaginable by those people, no matter how much wealth and power they accumulated. Right. Just having the ability to close the door and adjust the climate and have your waste whisked away from your house in such a fashion, and to not smell all of the time, right? I know those sorts of things are relative and are minor, perhaps. but like we live such lives of spectacular plenty
Yeah.
that I get the and to some extent, like I admire someone like Peter Thiel who wants for nothing and will want for nothing for the rest of his life because of, I mean, I know that he's sort of a psycho, but like also his concern, but what allows him to voice these concerns or even think about these concerns is that amount of freedom that he has, right? He's utterly divorced from the world of want and need, and therefore can have these sort of grander conceptions about the world.
I have a dimmer view of Thiel. I think he's a low character for one
No,
reason.
I think he is also probably of low character,
But
sure.
because, like you're right, like as far as the creature comforts, he's not wanting for anything, but I think he's not satisfied and he's trying to change the way society works so that he thinks that he'll find satisfaction in that. Like,
yeah, but again, I don't want to argue the particulars of
Right.
Peter Thiel's worldview.
Right.
But this idea that somehow the status quo is completely acceptable, maybe it's only completely acceptable because we are relying on a paradigm of exponential growth that is no longer the case. And we are slow. I think the point of Gordon, the point of Tyler Cohen is to say we need to recognize that we cannot rely on the sort of exponential and explosive growth that produced this incredible world of plenty
Right.
to continue to and I think to some extent, not to tie it into the look around and we're not this is fining as the world burns around us, but like we are in the midst of a global populist spasm
Yes.
that is a reaction to a stratification and a rise in global inequality that is becoming untenable for the system, right? And a lot of it, I sort of, my intuition and I feel like there's part of me that wants to brush it away, that wants to say, oh, you're just a bunch of whiners. What are you complaining about? But it doesn't matter how much I think that the person who's complaining about the world is just a whiner who's complaining about the world. That sort of malcontent, that discontent manifests in ways that make reality for all of us less pleasant, especially if they get together and start voicing and doing something about that malcontent.
Right.
Look no further than the politics of the United States in the early 21st century here, right?
Right. I mean, you're right, but I still do think that there is a recency bias. I think just that century is warping how people view how things should progress, right? What if it takes like another generation before we get to the next leap? In retrospect, like if you were to fast forward 100 years from now, and let's say in 2060, we're looking back, this is 2125, right? And oh my God, 2060, there was this leap forward, right? But all the people in the 2020s and the 2030s were hemming and hawing about how there's this stagnation and things are backsliding into this populist fervor, and like climate change is going to disrupt further this instability, and oh my God, all this bad stuff happened, and then decades later, things resettle, something new that we can't imagine right now takes hold, and then things kind of stabilize, and people live even better than we do now. Like, I think like living through it is different than like looking back on it, because like the electricity, internal combustion engine, all of these things we're just talking about like in retrospect, but it took a while for all that to kind of take hold. The planes were dangerous for a while, and now we take them for granted. Like if something goes sideways, it becomes international news if a plane crashes. Like it's so safe, right? I think experiencing it and reading about it in history books is different, and I think we should kind of recognize that things are progressing. They're not progressing all at once, but things are trending in a good direction, and we may have a point, let's say by the time we're old geezers, even older than we are now, we have stage 0 detection. That's like a common thing, right? Basically, like the robots are so good that every cancer can be detected at the 0 stage, right? Like reliably. To where now heart disease, probably not going to do anything with it because people have to change their eating habits, right? Let's say, but like your cells kind of like going rogue. Like if you're able to get ahead of it, hey, you got to get rid of your left nut, now, because in 5
Right, no,
years.
I suspect that we are. And the things that you're describing, though, crucially, are fully grokkable by the current mind,
Yeah.
right? Like it is perfectly conceivable to imagine a world in the future that we are truly cancer-free, that we are, in fact, like largely disease-free,
Right.
that we are largely free from the constraints of bodily degradation in any meaningful way. Maybe we don't actually solve aging,
Right.
but maybe we get to the point where the average human lives until they're 87 years old,
And it's
then
mostly
97
quality, right?
years old.
Like 85 of it is quality. In the last 2 years, it falls apart. Instead of,
Right.
now.
Maybe there's something about the human body that we just degenerate after 120 years, and that's just what it is. And there's
Right.
there is some sort of upper limit. Who
It's
knows?
probably like a bridge. The body's the bridge to something else, you would think, once the robots figure it out.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a conversation for a different episode of this podcast, at the very least. Is there anything else in my response essay that you would like to point at, or otherwise respond to, or perhaps object to?
No, although I will say, just it just speaks to my short-term thing. Like my memory is such that I forget these things. I forgot about the promise of the Segway.
Just how overhyped it was
Right.
as a consumer
Overhyped.
product?
And in retrospect, I'm thinking, like, how could people have thought that? I mean, obviously, I know this because I know how it unfolded, but like the infrastructure wasn't there, right? And the need that it filled, people were kind of getting ahead of themselves, kind of like how the point that you were making about the iPad. Like people eventually found some use for it, but it didn't like replace any of the other things that it did, right? And like
Right.
the Segway, like it's useful in very limited ways. The way that this country is set up, you need vehicles to get around. So basically, it's a limited use case, the Segway. You can't go from your suburbs to your in the city job with a Segway, like under the best of circumstances. So basically, the best you could do
Right,
is
it requires the reimagining
Right.
of urban and American life writ large,
Right.
in a way that certainly we just weren't prepared to tolerate.
right. And so the change, like if you're going to be a change agent in society, it has to be overwhelming enough to where other things happen. So like when Uber came in to disrupt the established taxi industry, it was able to overwhelm all the regulatory hurdles, right? Like the medallion system in New York City.
By ignoring
By
them.
ignoring it, because like they were disruptive enough, break things and whatever, but like the Segway did not have that ability to do it. Like there wasn't anything to disrupt. You need something that you can overtake. There was nothing else. Like Uber overtook an existing infrastructure of taxis, right? Basically, it was a slight change, right?
Also, and it didn't change. It wasn't revolutionary in the sense that it wasn't changing the product.
Right.
It was just changing the way that it was delivered to the consumer.
yeah.
It changed the relationship between the person who needed a ride and the person who wanted to give them a ride.
Right, and so like a lot of there's Airbnb. I mean, I think that has kind of gone the other way now. But like initially, it was going to try to replace the hotel model, right? But eventually, people found fault with the Airbnb model of like all these fees. Like, why am I doing laundry? I could just go to a Hyatt and live like a king. So like, but at least it was striving to replace an existing thing. So like, same thing with the car. Like people were on carriages and horses and whatnot. So it's like, hey, something faster than that. Like everything is kind of like whatever you have, build on it. Can you make this better? And like, so I think you can make changes in that way. But if you're trying to create a world where like, wouldn't it be great if everybody did this one thing? Like you can't do that. Like it has to be something that already exists that you can build on it.
All right. One last element of related media to consume, as I was thinking about the story stability, is the movie WALL-E by Disney Pixar.
Yeah.
Of course, humanity has used up all of Earth's resources and is forced to leave the planet on giant ships where they have all of their needs met and exist in perfect stability with the environment around them, but they are reduced to slovenly blobs who can't even really walk around anymore. And the AI that runs every aspect of their lives does everything it can to maintain stability. It's like the whole point of that antagonist in that movie is the maintenance of stability. It's all that the machines in that story are concerned with. Because a return to Earth for those humans would no doubt result in more hardship, right? That would be an absolute upset of the stability of that system,
Right.
and would experience pain in a way that humans for the last X hundred number of years since they left Earth have been free from.
Right.
But again, sort of getting back to the thing about Robert Benton, there's something inside the human animal that says we will accept a certain amount of risk of pain and suffering in return for autonomy.
Yes.
And a chance of discovering and seeing what we are made of,
Right.
or capable of doing. Why Philip K. Dick, and why this story in particular? If nothing else, what I hope that the last hour of conversation has shown is that Stability, this story, and PKD as a writer, is just an example of why it's such a rich text for exploring questions about our world, our current reality, and everything that we experience here. It's not a particularly beautiful story. In fact, as I said, I could find no lines that I thought were of particular note.
Right.
It's not even particularly sophisticated. It was written by a teenager, and while I would say it shows a great deal of promise, it still does come off as having been written by something of an amateur. Although I will say, as a constructed work of 8 or 10 pages or whatever it is, very, very effective.
Yeah.
He gets in, he takes you to a world very, very quickly. He's very efficient always, something that will recur the more that we read of him. Very, very efficient at getting you into the world and explaining to you, which is not to say that he makes the reader comfortable. In fact, a lot of the time, he's making you uncomfortable by dropping you into these worlds. But he is an incredibly effective storyteller in that way.
Right.
And he does it without sort of holding your hand. It is among the first stories he ever wrote, so it felt appropriate to choose it as the first one. But also, it's able to produce in me a series of questions and reactions about the world that I am very much excited to explore. And I don't know what else you can ask for from a writer or from any artist, other than that they provide you or provoke in you a curiosity and engagement with the world around you. And he's always done that for me. Even when I find his prose to be plodding and to be like unpleasant even at times to read, he's always working in the world of ideas that I enjoy engaging with. And I think it's great that a story that a teenaged Philip K. Dick wrote sometime during the middle of the 1940s stands the test of time to the point where we can have an interesting conversation about our current world in 2025. And that to me is just as impressive as some of the Neil Stephenson way of predicting the future, right? Like Neil Stephenson is able to predict future technologies extrapolated from what he knows about the world of today in ways that seem almost magical. Philip K. Dick is able to predict what will still be interesting to talk about 75 years later, which is it's quite an interesting thing. And he was a guy who, as we will discover, was often seemed untethered from his own reality and completely unsure of his own place in the world and what it meant to be a person in the world and what the world was, what it meant to be a biological thing experiencing the world around us. I mean, I think an argument can be made, and I know that is sort of the reason that podcasts exist, essentially, like these sort of deep dive things exist, is that you can sort of mine any text for anything, right? If you are that sort of a person. But I think that there is something intrinsic to the work of PKD that speaks to the world of today. And it's not just if you zoom in far enough on anything that you can have an interesting conversation about it. But maybe there is some aspect of that as well.
I mean, I do think if you get away from the particulars, there's a lot of cyclical patterns, right? So the troubles of the 1940s will happen again in the 2020s, and it happened in the 1860s. It seems to be like this ebb and flow where you have these peacetime, everything's easy, then there are hard times, and it kind of almost rhymes. And so if somebody's able to identify the essence of that issue, like it'll have like a lot of staying power to where like 80 years on, you can read it and then you can apply that into whatever's happening in that moment. Like it's not like he predicted what would happen today. It's just this is the human condition, and a lot of stuff kind of is unresolved, and it kind of comes back into fashion, and you just have to kind of deal with it based on the new parameters.
Yeah. I think if you are the sort of artist who has an intuitive feel for what it is to be human, or has questions about what it is to be human, it doesn't matter in what time you were writing. That your the human animal does not change in any meaningful way, or in a way that matters from generation to one generation to another.
Right.
In that sense. All right. Anything else you'd like to say about stability? Or anything else that we've talked about here tonight, Abe?
No, that was an enjoyable read. I did not know reading it that this was the writings of a 16 to 18-year-old. Like it was pretty well done overall.
Yeah, and I don't know that I want necessarily to like definitively come up with some sort of PK Dicksquisition ranking system or rating system, but like my instinct is to do that anyway.
Yeah.
And so these ratings or rankings will perhaps be arbitrary and will be don't think that the rating of this story is in any way can be related to the rating of any other story or novel that we do.
Right.
Because of course that would suggest some sort of objective criteria here. My feeling about stability just itself is that it's like a 2.5 stars story out of 5, maybe.
Yeah.
I think that that's about right. There's nothing about it in terms of its aesthetics that jumps out at you as being special, and I think that's the sort of thing that you need to elevate it to like a 4 or 5 star review. But I think 2.5 stars is actually kind of generous, but also appropriate for this story. So that's what I'm going with, 2.5 stars.
I'm gonna go with my binary not bad. You know, yeah, we got the bad and the not bad.
As you say when you're reviewing movies, you say it's a movie and this was a short story. As a sort of button to this episode and future episodes of the Philip K Dicksquisition, we'll be reading also from the Exegesis of Philip K Dick. The Exegesis is nearly 900 pages of selected journal entries that PKD wrote between 1974 and his death in 1982. He had experiences in February and March of 1974 that he believed were some sort of communion with the divine. The published selections comprise only a small percentage of his total journaling output in those 8 years. But even what we have is too much to tackle in one go. So when the Exegesis offers direct commentary on the PKD story we are discussing, we may find it illuminating to see what he had to say about his own work and how it relates to his experiences in early 1974, and how his stories fit into what he viewed as his broader project, one that he wasn't completely aware he was engaged in when he wrote them. But not every story comes up in the Exegesis. Given that, we will use a form of divination to determine which pages in the Exegesis we will tackle. We will not be throwing the I Ching as PKD did when writing The Man in the High Castle, but we will roll dice. While I believe all forms of divination to be hokum, I also believe that basically any worthwhile text can offer insight into almost any inquiry, especially when approached with an open and pattern-seeking mind. Perhaps what I mean to say is that while I don't think that there is any mystical connection to absolute divine truth to be found by reading the tea leaves, there is something to be said for allowing the coincidences and synchronicities in life to be in happy dialogue with a search for meaning. Put another way, I am interested in the idea that anything and everything can kind of explain everything else, if you're willing to think through it.
This week, we have landed on page 86 of the Exegesis, which is in the midst of a letter that he wrote in February of 1975 to Claudia Bush, a graduate student working on her dissertation about what she took to be PKD's unifying theme of illusion versus reality. In the letter, he includes a few pages of notes he took outlining a novel that he has given the working title, Enough to Scare the Dead, which would eventually become Valis. He writes to Claudia Bush that the included notes are a perfect document of his writing process, that an idea comes to him, quote, in the twinkling of an eye, end quote, and is built upon by a deep exploration of his personal experiences. He is describing his writing process as less of a creative act than as an act of discovery, or as an investigation of his own true experiences. In February and March of 1974, PKD experienced what he believed to be a time dysfunction, in which he was transported to the 2nd century A.D. In the treatment for the novel provided in his letter to Bush, he writes that he doesn't believe that this represented a jumping back in time, rather that 1974 represented a leap forward of about 2,000 years from his actual reality, and that everything he remembered of the intervening millennia were false memories, quote, pasted in retrospectively to give verisimilitude, patching over the ellipses of missing time with fake memories in order to give uninterrupted continuity, end quote. He believes that present reality, such as it is actually in a state of temporary reverse flow, in which he is experiencing things that have already happened, and we are moving backwards to a moment in the far past, which is actually the true present, of massive import. In the proposed novel, Enough to Scare the Dead, a modern LA businessman has a consciousness living within and alongside himself, a resurrected early Christian from 180 A.D., who is a fierce and righteous advocate for the then only recently departed Christ. The LA businessman is shocked by the ferocity of the resurrected entity, as his conception of Christ and his apostles is that of the meek and sacrificial lamb, rather than of the returning revolutionary, judge and king, as found in Revelation. As with all things 2-3-74 and the Exegesis, this is a lot. A couple of things are noteworthy as they relate to stability. Primarily, it's simply interesting that this short story, among the very earliest complete works we have from PKD, centers around a time machine. Though the device is external to our protagonist Benton, and he ostensibly controls it, Benton doesn't exactly act with what can be called agency in relation to the device. Instead, he is subject to the irresistible will with which it is somehow imbued. He is, at every turn, compelled to act by forces he does not understand nor direct. In other words, Robert Benton, a character in a story PKD wrote in 1947 or so, is the unwitting recipient of difficult-to-decipher cosmic messages and subject of a time-dislocating event that results in a reality-shattering remaking of his entire society. Just as PKD says he himself was the unwitting recipient of cosmic divine messaging in 1974, and just as PKD says he was the subject of a time dysfunction that told him that his so-called current reality was a false one. This is, if nothing else, a pleasing symmetry. In both, we have discontinuous, patched-over realities, in which our protagonists are the subjects of outside forces that break their standing epistemologies. Stability, a short story Philip K. Dick wrote as a teenager, perhaps suggests that whatever really happened to him in 1974, these aren't themes or theses he was inventing, but discovering and investigating. Was he, in 1974, subject to a divine invasion akin to Benton's, or was this a mind now subject to itself, to a lifetime of obsession and dislocation? A man whose real life inevitably conformed to the truth in his fiction. If you enjoyed this first episode of the Philip K Dicksquisition, please consider subscribing or sharing with someone you think might also enjoy it. If your podcast delivery service of choice has a rating feature, please consider leaving a review. You can find the Philip K Dicksquisition on Substack at brainiron.substack.com, where you will find a text version of this podcast, a transcript, and where you can subscribe to support the show. Thanks for listening.
The proceeding was created with 100% human content.